All right, good afternoon again. It's been quite a series of conversations today and gatherings, and I know a lot also, not just in what you're hearing up here, but in these spaces in between. As you've had a chance to converse, there's a lot of energy, and let this time that we have move us forward so that we can keep this conversation going. This is our last panel. Again, a panel of bringing together a lot of heart and actually a lot of lineage and expressions, pulling back from the past and into the future as we think about Suzan Harjo. It's really my great honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Philip Deloria, professor at Harvard University, and also Duke Ray Harjo II. Duke, I just wanted to take a second to thank you and thank your family, because I know that it's also a lot of giving from the children of great people, and to also bring that into your life and have it be a lifelong journey. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I really, really appreciate you, appreciate the energy that you've given, and I know just Suzanne's joy, love, and deep admiration and delight with you as well. We also are expecting shortly Mary Catherine Nagel, who's a partner in Pipestem Law and a playwright. And we also have Mark Trehant, who's the editor of Indian Country Today. So we have a wonderful mix of the conversations around expression, journalism, stereotypes, the way that people see things and want to change the way people are seen. So with that, we'll start with you, Phil.
That's it? Okay. My advance is just, yeah, okay, thanks. Well, I'll just join every other speaker in saying how honored I am to be here today, and how meaningful it is to have a chance to talk about Suzanne, to pay tribute to her, to offer thanks, and to do it in this company, which is really quite fantastic. I'm going to come back to this. Suzan Shown Harjo is a national treasure, yes, but what kind of treasure is she? And how might we make sense of a career so diverse, so all-encompassing, so extraordinarily consequential? When President Barack Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, he surely checked off one box, American national treasure. But since most of her career has been spent pushing against the culture and politics of the United States, it is fair to say that the deeper nationalness of her treasure is more clearly tribal, Muscogee and Cheyenne and Arapaho, and intertribal, pan-tribal, across the broadest range of possibilities. Duke Harjo and I have had a series of conversations, and in fact one sort of delightful phone conversation where all three of us were sort of on the phone kicking things around. And so I regard us as sort of co-conspirators. While he, of course, literally grew up with Suzan Harjo, I kind of sort of grew up with her. Suzan Harjo and my father, Vine Deloria, were a quite well-matched team, where he was strategic and conceptual, she was tactical and operational, except when they reversed, and they both did those things together. Where she learned from him, he learned from her, sometimes siloed a bit in their own fields of operations. They found numerous opportunities to collaborate, whether it was on NMAI and repatriation, religious freedom, or of course the famous trademark lawsuit challenging the Washington, D.C. football team. They haunted the literary bars of New York, the White Horse and the Lion's Head, to say nothing of the Spar Bar and other Indian bars as well. And when she was in New York or DC and he was in Denver or Tucson, I sometimes got to answer the phone and see if he was ready to wake up after a long night at the typewriter for a chat with Suzan Harjo. So Suzan has been a friend and mentor to me since I was in graduate school, and it is my pleasure and honor to offer her my public gratitude. The context in which the two of them operated from the 1960s on, one might describe as an American Indian culture of politics. That is, the way of life in which they were both embedded, one aspect of their shared culture, revolved around politics and the acts of doing politics. The local politics of tribal councils, the national politics of the National Congress of American Indians and other intertribal organizations, and the international or transnational politics of Indian people navigating their relations with all three branches of the United States government, and then later with international organizations as well. So meetings, conferences, sponsorships, deals, lobbying, negotiating, testifying, voting, suing. The last half of the 20th century saw the consolidation of an Indian political class, completely continuous with the native politics of the past, but empowered and transformed by the sheer number of challenges, opportunities, and administrative structures open to petition and perhaps even open to capture. We have heard much already of Suzan Harjo's gifts as a political philosopher, strategist, and activist, and it is appropriate, I think, to position her across the full range of her career as one of the most important actors in this American Indian culture of politics. It is the context in which we can, I think, perhaps most easily see her as a tribal national kind of treasure. At the same time, though, we also know her as a poet, artist, literary writer, musician, actor, and critic, a maker in her own right of culture and cultural treasure. In the 1930s, the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci suggested that culture, I have to do a little theory thing here for a moment, culture, that bundle of meanings, behaviors, and messages shared and contested by a group or groups of people, that culture exerted its own force and power on the world of economics, politics, and law. And so feelings, affect, emotion, shared sympathy, worldview, these things were not the result of political or economic systems, but rather they were their first principle. Any struggle for social transformation, and perhaps those struggles for justice on the part of the oppressed in particular, had to be fought across a broad front that included both politics and culture. Her word for this is atmosphere, and she uses it a number of times. Suzan Harjo's career offers us an explicit example distilled into a single extraordinary person of what that means. And perhaps nowhere so clearly as in her decades-long fight against racist stereotypes and cultural appropriations, has Harjo brought together a Native American culture of politics with an ambitious politics of culture. That is, an effort aimed at changing the hearts and minds and souls of those Americans who have loved to cheer on Indian mascoted football teams, wear Indian princess Halloween costumes, and steal Native cultures and identities for their own fun and profit. We might trace this dynamic back to Suzan's upbringing, and I want to sort of thank Gabby Tyak for that really quite brilliant sort of family history earlier today. As she suggested to me at one point, my parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles raised me to be political in ways that they were not or could not be. Our heroes were the warriors, holy people, ceremonial leaders, and all of those who made sure we had food, water, clothes, and blankets, and the things that made us look and feel Cheyenne or Muscogee when we wore them or held them or looked at them. As a young person, 4 years spent living in Italy, I think this is so important to her history, acclimated her to other possibilities and intensified her critical eye for American racism. Among the many markers for her early career, we might point specifically to 1962, and I feel happy to have a date that's earlier than some other dates. In that year, Clyde Warrior came to Harding High School, her high school in Oklahoma City, and spoke passionately and powerfully about anti-Indian racism and stereotypes. While he advanced, in this instance, a politics of culture, Suzan Harjo was simultaneously sent by the business committee of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma to travel as a high school student observer to Washington, D.C. for the National Congress of American Indians annual meeting. As she watched intertribal politics in action, she was simultaneously confronted by the omnipresent imagery associated with the football team of this city. Honing in on the University of Oklahoma's Little Red Indian mascot, and the toxic symbols and performances attached to Washington, D.C.'s football team, Clyde Warrior established two important nodal points for all that followed. Educational institutions might prove amenable to a series of promising political and cultural strategies: student activism, sit-ins, moral and ethical argument, lobbying, continual pressure, gradualism. In 1970, driven by such strategies and engineered by Native students, Oklahoma retired Little Red, and not far behind it were Stanford, Dartmouth, Utah, Miami of Ohio, and other colleges and universities, with many K-12 public school team mascots falling slowly in line over the course of the next decades. Professional sports, with a private, profit-focused economy, proved to be a very different situation, the second of these nodes. The Washington team, for instance, was demonstrably one of the most racist organizations in all of professional sports, among the very last to integrate. The protest arguments and media work that proved largely successful in the nonprofit educational sector did not carry the same efficacy when it came to the pros, and so they required other kinds of strategies. The result, over the course of Suzan Harjo's long career, has been a series of ups and downs, high points and low, moments of promise, moments of disappointment. This is what an activist goes through, fights through those things. In the early 1970s, with major colleges giving up their mascots, the horizon had to look somewhat promising. But foot-dragging and recalcitrance followed. The easy changes had been made. More challenging institutions remained stuck. The University of Illinois, for example, stands as a case study in institutional hostility, taking decades to retire its mascot and making its shift as much about lip service, more about lip service than actual change, a racist tradition that continues to this very day. In the 1990s, as Harjo and her plaintiffs filed their lawsuit, things again seemed to be looking up, particularly after an initial victory in 1999. By 2005, the NCAA had issued new rules regarding mascots, and a number of institutions again stepped up, curiously following a pattern in which Indian mascots often became red hawks, red wolves, and red storms with surprising frequency. So it will not surprise you to know that Suzan was in on the 2017 Washington Red Hawks Culture Jam. There's our friend Dan Snyder with his new logo. Of course, a number of institutions resisted, and the professional teams completely rejected that possibility of change, although, of course, slowly, as we're seeing, for example, in Cleveland, tiny incremental kind of movements. So did their enablers, including the Washington Post, which has a really bad habit of sponsoring and reporting on really poorly executed push polls. And folks like Bill Mayer, to whom Harjo sent a blistering letter following a particularly heinous show. Indeed, three striking letters in Suzan's collection date from 1999, the year the initial case was first decided. They are to Jack Kent Cooke, owner of the team, Paul Tagliabue, commissioner of the NFL, and interestingly, this one, which I put up here on the left here, to Abe Pollan, owner of the recently renamed Washington Bullets Wizards. I mean, she's really calling the irony of the fact that, like, your basketball team can change its name and your football team can't, and why is that exactly, and what would it look like to change the name? So all of these letters, pointedly courteous, right, politic in that sort of way, none of which received a response other than these owners oftentimes going to the media and sort of trashing the effort, right, in public, without sort of any sort of engagement with dialogue, right? By 2013, the momentum seemed to be building again. A number of sports writers, interestingly, led by folks like Mike Wise of ESPN and the Washington Post, Peter King of Sports Illustrated, publicly refused to say the R word and actually made that decision the subject of commentary and a kind of activism of their own. They joined others, notably the Portland Oregonian, the first in, and the cultural politics of appropriation seemed to acquire allies who made media itself not simply the reporter, right, but the subject of critique. And so Mike Wise, for example, appeared here at NMAI in 2013 on a powerful symposium on mascots held in this very room. And Black Washington, led by figures such as Post columnist Cortland Malloy and others, began to reevaluate their loyalty to the team relative to other kinds of racial alliances. I have to say I was here for this, and some folks invited me onto African American radio show, and I was kind of being politic. I was like, well, I get the fans have this, and they're like, no, professor, this is racist stuff, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, it is actually, right? And this was really cool, and I think really quite empowering, right, to see the ways that African American activists and folks really did kind of start to step up on this particular issue in this particular town. So you could say that one consistent thread running through many of these moments was Suzan Harjo's leadership and management of the legal strategy of two cases, Harjo et al. V. Pro Football, Inc. and Black Horse et al. V. Pro Football. Really, it was less a thread and more of, I think, a thick rope. Inspired by patent and trademark attorney Stephen Baird, the cases both aimed to remove trademark protections from the Washington team name under the provisions of the Lanham Act of 1946, which disallows trademark protection for scandalous material or that which holds people up to contempt, ill repute, or disparagement. The first case was filed in 1992 by these folks up the top. In April 1999, trademark judges unanimously canceled trademark protections for the DC team. 2006, the case was reversed on appeal, but only on a technicality, laches, which I'm not a lawyer, and I know there's a lot of lawyers in here. The claim that Harjo and the plaintiffs had waited too long to file their claim, that they were too old, they had aged out past the moment of development when the racism of the team name and the practices caused actual harm. The merits of the case, its argument and its evidence, though, still held strong. In 2005, as this laches problem became apparent, Harjo then went out and filed 2.0, right? Recruited, interviewed, and sponsored a second, younger group of plaintiffs. They filed with the Patent and Trademark Office in 2006, though the case was held pending resolution of the original Harjo case, which then ended in 2009 when the Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal. I'm hoping I'm getting this right because it's quite a convoluted, set of legal kinds of things. So the Black Horse team then won a second favorable ruling from trademark judges in 2014. In 2015, a federal district court ruling on summary judgment, right, upheld that decision. So things are looking good, right? In September 2014, after the second ruling, the case generated two brilliant mass media responses. One from South Park, which had its characters take over the team's trademark for their own business in an episode rich in irony and inversion. And if you haven't seen this, I do highly recommend it. The other on the Jon Stewart Show, which set up a meeting between Native advocates and DC fans in which the latter could not help but look ridiculous, ignorant, and petty. These are important, right? These kinds of expansions evidence, I think, a certain strategic success, right? From a native-driven politics of culture, the question now moved into the wider world of cultural production in which non-Indian people saw the painful ironies and the ethical rightness that underpinned the effort, and they made it the subject of their own creative work, informing and perhaps winning over bigger, more diverse, and I think perhaps unpredictable audiences, and that's what becomes interesting in this, in the politics of it. As Suzan Harjo often noted throughout the long legal battle, there's an important distinction between canceling the trademarks, that's not what happened, and canceling the registration of the trademarks. It was, as she often said, a pocketbook approach that did not interfere with free speech rights. And this is really important to her and I think really, really smart. Indeed, the trademark property right remained an artifact of common law use. The suits sought to remove the benefits and protections of registration as well as the government imprimatur of a racist stereotype. And so in this, she was politic and smart, narrowing in on the racism, leaving other issues untouched or sort of untouched yet. And I've only described part of what was a massive effort. The suits covered 6 existing trademarks, so Suzan Harjo had to file another intervening letter to go after any new trademark filings. A quirk in the Lanham Act declares that when an unhappy party appeals to a federal district court, the other party becomes the defendant. And so you get these kinds of things. So the Harjo plaintiffs had to defend the correct decision of the trademark office for a decade, and the Black Horse plaintiffs faced the same expensive, time-consuming fate. And so in 2011 then, Suzan Harjo shifted from legal to legislative strategy, introducing in congressional testimony a model bill that would have codified the Black Horse case into law. To do less, she argued, is an abdication of Congress's responsibility to govern and would be irresponsible to the plaintiffs. So the act would have brought Native trademarks under the Lanham Act, affirming the existing decision of the PTO. It's stunning to note that the congressional hearing took place on the morning after the capture of Osama bin Laden, famously and offensively framed around the notorious phrase, Geronimo EKIA, enemy killed in action. And so Harjo took the opportunity to make sure Congress understood the bigger picture. It wasn't just sports mascots or other cultural appropriations. The cultural abuse and denigration of Native peoples was in fact a central tenet of American culture. Was it simply good fun, she asked, to frame the world's most notorious terrorist as an Indian resistance leader? Were there no consequences to this conflation? Was culture meaningless? Or was it a deadly factory churning out the conditions, the atmospherics, right, under which social, political, legal, economic, environmental, and other forms of injustice were perpetrated against Native peoples? The answer is it was and is a deadly factory. And in this, Harjo set the table for scholars like Stephanie Freiberg, also testifying at the hearing, who has shown demonstrable consequences for the emotional development and the psychological well-being of Native children. Or perhaps it was scholars like Stephanie Freiberg who set the table for Suzan Harjo. Because this political work was supported and undergirded by the further work of culture, right? The constant round of interviews, television and radio shows. The Oprah clip this morning was so amazing, right? Written pieces, editorials, documentaries, protests. As she noted in congressional testimony regarding her work on racist representations while serving as executive director of the NCAI, we carried out this oppositions in statements, speeches, telephone calls, interviews, educational outreach, and coalition-building meetings, including failed attempts to contact the Washington NFL team's owner. And so Suzan Harjo fought this struggle, like so many others, across a broad front. She mobilized Native people, worked the halls of Congress and the courts, fused that kind of culture of politics with the politics of culture, wielding every tool at her disposal to change hearts and minds. Part of that effort was creating a vocabulary, words like disparagement, racism, and harm, and making them central to the conversation. Part of it was assembling those words into categories and comparisons. Part of it was bringing the argument home, not simply in moral and ethical terms, but also through the language and concepts of psychology, mental health and well-being, childhood development. The effort has left no possibility untouched. Indian country, all three branches of the federal government, state and local governments, American media, the academy, a web of social relations and alliances, and of course her own organizational acumen giving shape through the Morningstar Foundation, and in particular, its Just Good Sports initiative, which provides assistance to any locality or organization engaged with issues of cultural appropriation. So I focused on the question of mascots today, but it's worth remembering that the world of cultural appropriation, the stealing of indigenous culture for non-indigenous needs, is large, and that Suzan Harjo has driven change in it as well, whether that be pressing for standards for Indian arts and crafts laws, questioning ethnic imposters, or calling out fashion, literature, self-help, and other appropriations. As a philosopher activist, Suzan Harjo demonstrates the kind of psychological durability of someone who thinks necessarily over the very long term and who rides the ups and downs with a high degree of equanimity. Can't ever say that word. She has survived rejection, hostility, the inevitable stalkers and trolls. What's come out of her career is wisdom, deep and abiding, of which she seems to have acquired a significant amount at a very early age. I've been meditating in particular on the words that I used as an epigraph for my remarks today about how change might actually happen. Change, she says, occurs spherically and not in a linear or circular way. So most who think they know what happens and how either know next to nothing or way too much. Also, very little happens by chance, but not much is totally calculated. This I find like an amazingly deep philosophical statement. It's not something you can assimilate quickly. It's actually something you have to think on and meditate on. And I would not say that I understand exactly all of it. But I can say this, too often I think we draw a distinction between native and non-native epistemologies using two of these terms, and oftentimes we do it too easily and too casually. Western epistemology, we say, is linear and rational. The indigenous is cyclical and spiritual. I don't actually necessarily think this is true. But what Suzan Harjo asks us to do is something quite different, to contemplate a more complicated possibility, one that I suspect she has been contemplating systematically for some time. Note the way, for example, that the spherical shows up in, I think, one of the most brilliant and heartrending poems imaginable, this eulogy that, quite literally has me in tears with every reading. It's really, really quite powerful. And this is just the first sort of stanza. It goes on for quite a long time. I love the line, I love that you love that I'm smart. So what I think she's saying is something like this. Change is a course or a path, but not a linear one. It snakes its way across a spinning globe. There are patterns, but not predictable cycles to this movement. Mapped onto a sphere rather than a circle, they take on complexity and unpredictability. Your knowledge is uncertain. Events are familiar, but they're not direct repetitions. They are echoes, not calculations. You must make your own plans and rely on them, but you must also understand that chance and contingency might matter more, that there are forces and possibilities that you cannot fully understand or anticipate. Those are the words of someone who has seen and lived much. They carry both the imprint of both the spiritual world and the school of hard knocks. They suggest that even your hardest work be approached with humility and with that great sense of humor. So we might ponder them as a gift to us collectively, even as we celebrate the giver, who is indeed a treasure, tribal, intertribal, national, global, world historical, indigenous, human. Thank you, Suzan Harjo.